Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on this rainy day in New York City. This is the Artese Zandri Coffee Talk series. Today we have with us Ms. Nikki Bruno coming in from LA. Very good morning to you, Nikki. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Paige.
We're here and we have you with us today to talk about essentially how to pick your ass up and thrive after divorce. So, and I think a lot of what we're going to talk about can actually apply to many instances in people's lives where they're going through some sort of critical loss or a significant transition of some sort. And so I wanted to sort of start out by talking about how we met, which was almost a year ago now. And we were introduced to a colleague, and you were in town for a media conference. Is that right? Do I remember that?
Yes, I was. Yeah, it was a 3-day event for getting publicity. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. One note before I forget. Anyone dialing in, if you have questions, please feel free to, if you're dialing in via Zoom, feel free to enter them in the Q&A portion. And if you're watching through Facebook Live, you can DM those questions to us. Sorry for the interruption. I didn't want to forget. So we meet, you're in New York for a conference, and we meet for breakfast. And I can remember we talked on the phone before that. And I remember not letting you get off the phone without saying, I have to meet you in person. And you just you were coming to New York, I think it was like a week later, 2 weeks later. And I said, what do you have? And we had breakfast first thing. I think it was even like 7:30 in the morning.
It was. Yeah. I felt so awful about asking a New Yorker to wake up.
Well, I mean, but it was so, and that is rare, but it was so the right thing to do. I felt that we had just like a fantastic conversation immediately. One of my favorite things that you said right away is that you don't do small talk. And I thought, great, let's really get down to business. And At the time, I was actually going through a transition of my own. I was going through a separation, and it really felt good to be able to be vulnerable in that moment. And I think that's probably what a lot of your clients experience when they work with you. So I would love it if you would just share with us really quickly your background and some of your journey and some of the stuff that you do to help clients through these serious life transitions.
Absolutely. And I am my background, my journey. So my background is I grew up in the Northeast. I was kind of that nerdy golden girl overachiever, academic overachiever person. I come from a family of educators. My father was a career public school superintendent, and later on at one point, my brother was a school principal. I was an English teacher, and my dad was still a superintendent. And so I was all about academic achievement. I was absolutely privileged to have two parents who, and still am, who love me unconditionally, which I have come to believe is the ultimate privilege, in addition to being white, being, in upper middle class, all the rest of it. So I came up through school, class valedictorian. I went to Princeton. I later on went to Harvard for my graduate degree in education. And I got married in 2006, and I lived in Boston with my husband. We had a blast of a life. We were jet setting. We took a 9-month honeymoon all around the world. We just lots and lots of international travel. I mean, we were kind of, people would call us the perfect couple. And in a lot of ways we were. And we decided to start a family, and our son was born and our daughter was born, and everything just kind of seemed amazing.
Yeah.
But, yeah. And, at about 8 to 9 years of marriage, I started feeling absolutely miserable in our marriage, and our dynamic became tense and had a degree of conflict that really became unsustainable for me, and it was a toxic situation for me. And some of the toxicity was happening and becoming clear in front of our children. Mm-hmm. And it got worse and worse and worse. Mm-hmm. And I filed for divorce. This was in 2015. And we proceeded to go through a 3-year-long high conflict divorce. It was litigated. We ended up settling, thank goodness. But the whole process nearly broke me. It was emotionally, financially, socially, spiritually. It was a traumatic experience, and I got through it. I survived and kind of popped out on the other end. I moved out and created a new home for my children and me. And I mean, when this whole process started, my kids were 9 months old and 3 years old. And after about 9 months of what I call sucking my thumb and kind of healing and getting my feet back under me, making sure my kids' feet were under them, and leading as mundane and boring and normal a life as humanly possible.
This is the 9 months after your 3-year divorce process.
Yeah, this is the 9 months. Yeah. This probably began at around, yeah, exactly. I mean, the legal process was still going on, but we were starting to make some progress, and the key point is that we were separated. That's the key point, because I had moved out, and I had some space to heal, to work with my therapist, and to, like I said, suck my thumb, eat comfort food, binge Netflix, when my kids weren't with me. And I hit a turning point after sucking my thumb for 9 months where I looked in the mirror and I said, Bruno, this isn't funny anymore. And that was the turning point where I said, I am going to get my mojo back, because I had lost it. My self-esteem was in the tank. I had gained 30 pounds. It wasn't pretty. But I was compassionate with myself, because it was very normal for me to be feeling the way that I felt. And that was the turning point that sent me to a fitness coach. I started a nutrition program and a workout program that I followed to the letter for the next probably 9 months to a year. And I started my personal epic comeback. And to get sort of meta, a huge part of my comeback from a high conflict divorce was to start my current business, which is called The Epic Comeback. And what I decided to do, sort of catalyzed by my work with my business coach and just soul searching, was it became very obvious to me that what I needed to do was to dedicate all that I have, my fancy education, my passion, my teaching skill, all of my entrepreneurial skills, because by that point I had been a solo entrepreneur with an editorial services business for 11 years. And everything that I have to help people to kick ass in their lives again in the wake of and even during a life-shattering crisis. So what I do now is I'm an empowerment coach, and I work with people, mostly women at this point, but I also work with men who are going through or emerging from high conflict divorce, illness, loss, an infertility journey, something that you're a high achieving rock star human, and you're used to having mojo, you're used to being kind of on top, and something scatters the pieces of your life, and you go through what I usually say is 1 to 3 years of pure and utter hell.
Well, okay, so a couple of things you touched upon that I want to circle back to. You talked about, I know you have something that you're going to share with us later, which is part of the epic comeback and that journey, what that looks like. But a couple of things that you said about your own personal experience was that you hired a couple of coaches.
I did.
It sounds like you really let go of the wheel and trusted the process. And I can relate to that. I had a similar experience where I really felt like groundless, there's a sense of groundlessness, and then, surrender. Yeah. And just have to be willing, I think, to surrender. And that what you said resonates so much, because it's hard to do that, because during the process of divorce, particularly, you also feel the need to be very, very strong. Yeah. And unrelenting in fighting for, what you need. So, okay. So getting back to some other things you said was, you mentioned high conflict divorce and dealing with difficult personalities. and some things that we've talked about in the past that I'd love for you to touch upon are some high conflict communication skills and tools that people can use when they all of a sudden discover, and maybe you want to talk about what that discovery process is like too at some point, but when they realize that they're in a situation that they're going to have to manage this high conflict situation a little differently.
Definitely. So when you're in a high conflict situation, and by the way, since my own divorce, I have been researching and studying and also working with my own clients. And I also have, I have a lot of colleagues who are in family law, mediators, family law attorneys like you. Yeah. And so what I really have, I've become an expert on high conflict divorce and high conflict communication, and certainly also on high conflict personalities. Which generally means it's kind of like a euphemism for folks who have often a personality disorder, such as borderline personality, narcissistic personality. There might be some sociopathy going on in there, but basically people who tend to, wherever they go, conflict and drama follow. And so there is a pathology to it, but there are also people who may be kind of, any sort of personality trait like narcissism. It's a spectrum, right? So we all have a degree of narcissism in our personality. It's a matter of whether has it become pathological, does it interfere with people's relationships, and
those are the smoke signals. If you see, conflict following someone in wherever they go, that's the flyer. Okay.
Yeah. And they're generally folks who want to have a very high degree of control. They tend to micromanage. They tend to come across as being arrogant and cocky. But yes, so a high conflict situation really does have to be treated in a particular way. And it's absolutely essential if, let's say that you're in a situation where you're in a, you're married to somebody who you've come to a place where you feel the relationship isn't working out and you are seeking a divorce. It's really important. You cannot do it alone. You can't do it alone. And it's also important to know that if you're in a high conflict situation, and Paige, I know you can speak to this, the highest conflict situations are the ones that are the most costly. The divorce takes longer. It potentially goes to trial. And unfortunately, it's also essential to find a fantastic attorney and or mediator, potentially both. And so it requires going through a high conflict divorce that's as smooth as possible, requires finding the right people to help you right up front. And part of that means do not make the mistake of working with an attorney who might charge, $100 or $200 or even $300 an hour less, because an attorney who may have a higher hourly rate but is excellent and has high conflict experience, a real depth of knowledge about basically the playbook of how it's going to go when there's one or more high conflict personalities involved.
What are some of the things that those professionals should possess? What are you looking for when you are reaching out for that support network? What should people be? What boxes should they be checking?
Should be an attorney who has litigated. Again, it doesn't necessarily your case doesn't necessarily have to go to litigation, but you're looking for an attorney who has practiced only family law, exclusively family law for several years. And even more important, can tell you the approximate number of, or maybe percentage of their caseload that are high conflict cases. They're accustomed to being in court representing folks whose opposition is a high conflict person. And the attorney should have read a book by Bill Eddy called Splitting, which is the playbook.
I have to write this down. Okay.
Yeah. It's the playbook. It's written by Bill Eddy, and there's a co-author as well. And Bill Eddy is, I believe he's both an attorney and a social worker, a licensed social worker. He is the high conflict divorce to someone with a personality disorder champ. He's in San Diego. He's the co-founder of the High Conflict Institute in San Diego. And he has written this book, Splitting, is pretty much the playbook for how to navigate a divorce with a high conflict person. And so when you go to interview an attorney, what you're looking for is that they're going to show you that they hear what you're saying and they know what emotional abuse is. They know what gaslighting is. They know, they understand what the dynamic is like, and they can sort of mirror to you and describe to you kind of the experience that you're going through, and showing a thorough understanding of what a high conflict personality is like, and starting to be very specific with you about some results in the cases that they've litigated, and perhaps even speaking to how highly educated or not the judges in your county are in situations like this. I mean, just really showing you that they have mastery of your kind of case.
And so when someone is in a high conflict divorce and they are learning how to communicate differently with their ex.
Yep.
What are some of the techniques that you found have worked for yourself and your clients? And while you have also now employed the appropriate support staff around you. We have clients who will we start out by, rewriting their emails, every single one of them. We tell them all that. You don't that's it. We are now we are your shield and your sword. So use us. Don't communicate until we review it. And we always suggest to clients, here's how you might want to approach it to get what we are trying to get at the end of the day. Because having that external perspective really helps strip out the type of behavior that I think creates that toxic washing machine, effect. So what else have you found works for clients when they're sort of learning what we call it, just like retraining in terms of communication?
Yes, you have to retrain yourself, especially since you've been in an intimate relationship with this person, and you have been accustomed, probably at least at some point, to trusting them. So once you have a support system, including an attorney and or mediator, someone, definitely an attorney is best, I believe, in this kind of a situation. And you also probably have, hopefully, a therapist who's helping you to sort out the dynamic that you're in, and helping you to, this is very important, regulate your emotions. Express and regulate your emotions as you go through this process. I mean, in the beginning, there's a lot of shock involved when you kind of discover and start doing some research and start receiving some information about, oh my gosh, this is what I've gotten myself into. But the number one key in communicating with your spouse or soon to be former spouse, or your former spouse when you're co-parenting and moving on into your life, is to keep all emotion out of the communication. It literally, I would have to go outside and find a stick and bite it. This is why the amount of self-restraint, and this is true in co-parenting as well, the amount of self-restraint and being as unemotional and brief in your communication and direct in your communication, because you want to, particularly if you have children, you want to keep the level of conflict down. And keeping the level of conflict down with a human being who is designed almost to, or I mean, if this is a pathological situation, it's a disorder that creates a human being who is a conflict magnet.
Can we have so much to unpack, and you mentioned children, and I think I don't want to not spend enough time talking about what to do in a situation where you have, in your case, you said your children were 9 months and 3 years old. You've got a lifetime of, hopefully productive, or at least workable relationship with your ex
Mm-hmm.
to be able to raise the children together. So we were talking in prep for this call, you had mentioned the concept of I think people are now familiar with co-parenting, but you'd mentioned the concept of parallel parenting. And admittedly, that is not a term that I had heard before, but I'd like for you to describe for everyone what that means and how that works. And I find that I do think that there are a lot of parents who end up parenting that way, and some might consider it just surrender, and might consider it something not as positive as the way that I think you are approaching it and the way that you define it. So
Yep.
Can you just draw some contrasts between those
Sure.
two things?
Absolutely. So when you are parents and you go through the divorce process, the process or the reality, it doesn't end with the signing of the judgment, right? It doesn't end with the divorce becoming legalized, because you are continuing to parent your children together. And in particular, if you're sharing custody, if you have, a 50-50 parenting plan, then you've become anointed as what society and what judges and attorneys would call a co-parent, right? So you're co-parenting your children. Your children probably live in two different homes. And so the thing about co-parenting is that the prefix there, the co, implies and hopefully means that you're collaborating. Hopefully means that you're literally parenting together. And you are.
Yeah, it depends on it. Correct. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And so psychologists and other experts have studied co-parenting quite a bit. Actually, the studies that have come out are more usually focused on the children and how children do when they're in co-parenting situations. There aren't as many studies that are focused on the parents themselves and their attitudes toward co-parenting and how it works and all the rest of it. But there's a lot more interest in that now, because amazing statistic, 40% of babies, of children who are born in the United States now are born out of wedlock, which inherently means that they have either just one, a single parent who has all the custody, or a single caregiver, one caregiver, or there's a co-parenting situation.
Right.
And so it's become like closer and closer to being the norm. And so co-parenting and parallel parenting are two kind of different styles of parenting. And parallel parenting it means that you have what happens in one household. Let's say what happens in one spouse's household and is kind of separate from what's happening in the other spouse's household. So different rules on screen time, different rules on homework, different norms. There's like day-to-day management, two very, very different cultures, really, in the households. And that can be okay, very much okay. And there should not necessarily be an assumption that the two parents can work together. And unfortunately, there are situations, especially in high conflict situations, if you've just gone through a high conflict divorce where there's been a lot of enmity, where there's been a lot, even potentially hatred, and people acting terribly to each other, abuse. You can't expect that all of a sudden, when the divorce agreement is signed, that their personalities are going to change, or that their relationship is going to change. They don't want to be around each other. Every time they communicate, it tends to escalate. And now that the legal process is over, you no longer have the parents no longer have that sort of buffer, that sort of sword of your attorney who's helping you and guiding you and rewriting your emails, etc.
Right.
So
right.
And so parallel parenting is just that concept where it's sort of like live and let live, and release what's, when you drop your kids off at your spouse's home, you're really releasing control. And if you have joint legal custody, then of course you're going to have to be making some decisions together. For example, what schools are our children going to attend? How are they going to observe their religion? And how are we going to keep our children healthy? So decisions that involve health, mental health, physical health, et cetera, emotional health. And it can be hard enough to collaborate on those decisions because they're very important ones. But if you have joint legal custody, you really have to collaborate. And that's another reason why in a high conflict situation, there are often a lot of post-judgment matters. So often, you know, it's important can be very important for both parties to keep an attorney on retainer to deal with post-judgment issues.
And there are other professionals that couples can use post-judgment, like parenting coordinators, to help with those major decision-making items. But on a day-to-day basis, I mean, and maybe we should hop into the epic comeback, the diagram you have to share with us, to talk a little bit about what process what evolution do you need to go through to be able to say, you're dropping your children off at your ex's house. You know that person you've identified that person has at least put you through a cycle of emotional abuse. There has to be, you have to, I imagine, believe that in some sense that person can actually care for your children, because then you'd be in a different custody arrangement if you didn't. But talk about the evolution that you have to go through to be able to actually get comfortable with that parallel parenting, and with that, you know, just saying like, I accept that this is how it's going to be.
Yeah, well, so what you're seeing right now is the intellectual property of my company and the curriculum of my coaching program, which is the Epic Comeback coaching program. And this is a process for folks who, as I said, for folks who are going through and emerging from a really, really difficult situation, such as a high conflict divorce. And a little bit of background here, the way that I created this was that I conducted hundreds and continue to conduct case studies of people and organizations and athletic teams who have staged massive comebacks. And what I was doing as I studied these comebacks, I geek out on comebacks. It's just what I do, is asking two questions. Number one, what are the human qualities and characteristics that it takes to stage this kind of comeback, to come from a very low to a very high? And this definitely applies to a high conflict divorce situation. And then the other question I was asking was, what actions are people actually taking when they make this kind of transformation? What kind of pathway can I offer to my clients who don't know where to start and who feel stuck and are saying, okay, I'm ready to get my mojo back. I'm ready to do some massive inner work and potentially even outer work, but where do I start? So
it's not funny anymore.
It's not funny. Yeah, it's not funny anymore. Yeah. So yeah, I'd be happy to take you through just kind of I'm
not able to see it anymore. Julie, if you can hear, I don't know. Can you see the diagram still, Nikki?
I can't see the diagram at the moment. I could for a little bit. There we go.
Perfect.
Thank you so much. Wonderful. So this is the Epic Comeback journey, and I'm going to describe it. I'm going to just describe it quickly. So if you look at step one is if you're looking to stage an epic comeback, what that implies is that there's been an epic low, right? You're in hell. You're in hell. You're on the floor. Trauma, and then there's a period of healing, and that's the period that I was talking about, where I was sucking my thumb, and I was working with my therapist, and I was just kind of, I was really in a daze. There was a lot of sort of shock here. There was certainly some depression. I personally have a history of depression and anxiety, and nothing like a high conflict divorce to sort of activate that. And then step three is really the beginning of the comeback. The beginning of the comeback, and again, I'm not talking exclusively about myself. I'm talking about hundreds and hundreds of situations that I've studied. Is there some kind of turning point? So that was the moment when I looked in the mirror. When something happens, and you don't always know that it's a turning point when it's happening. Sometimes you only know retrospectively, oh yeah, that was the moment where straw broke the camel's back, or I went on that drive by myself, or I was listening to that song, or a lot of people, if they're parents, their turning point might involve their children. Like when my daughter said to me, Mommy, daddy says you're a liar, and you realize that there's parental alienation going on, or whatever. It could be anything. So that's the turning point where nothing is going to be the same after this. This is where you make a decision, or it becomes obvious to you that something needs to change. And what needs to change is that you need to take responsibility for your stuff and make something new happen. This is when you're like, okay, it's go time. And what I was saying to myself was, I am not going to be a victim. I've been on top before. I've had my mojo before. Yes, I lost it, but I have so many things going for me, and I'm going to get it back. I'm going to feel sexy again. I'm going to take charge of my life. I'm going to start a kick-ass new business, etc. After that, if you look at step 4, I call that reckoning. It's basically an assessment. It's when you are lining up, you're kind of taking your temperature, you're looking at your status, and you're sort of saying like, okay, this is what I've lost. This is what I've gained, because you do gain.
Yeah.
You gain wisdom, you gain strength, and you gain experience, and you gain a type of warrior energy from having survived a crisis, whether it's an illness. I mean, people who've gone through cancer, this happens for them too. People who have gone through super hard things. So reckoning is you're stopping, and you're really, this is such an important step. The steps 4 and 5, I would say, are the most important by far.
Yeah.
Step 4, you are saying, what's the good and the bad and the ugly of where I am right now? And
like an audit. And a really
it's an
very
audit.
Yeah.
It's an audit, and you have to be perfect. You have to, during this entire process. And if somebody asks me if you could distill this process down to one thing, the one thing that you need to do in order to stage an epic comeback is you need to tell the truth to yourself and to the most important people in your life.
How can you tell if you're not being honest? If someone's not being honest with you? Do you ever have someone come to you and they still haven't quite grasped the depth of the trauma and
absolutely. I mean, here's the thing is that you can always, you can tell the truth of where you are, and you may not have the depth of it. It comes out, sometimes it has to emerge over time, especially with trauma, because if you've gone through something traumatic, your body and your brain protect you from sort of the depth of how hard it was, or, and that's important because you sort of need that protection before you can really kind of get in there and process the feelings and process it. And I do want to state that I'm not a licensed mental health professional. And so when you're doing these processes, certainly you can be working with a coach like me, but if you're in a place where you're not functioning well emotionally, you should be working with a therapist, not just a coach. So the combination is amazing, by the way.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. I think there's a difference when working with a coach, because you really get the tools. I think it's and that is something that I find to be very distinct from just traditional therapy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's the combination. You're unstoppable if you can work with both, as long as you find the right people. Always have to find the right people. So getting back to the diagram. So once you go through the process of reckoning, which means that you're not ignoring the good. That's what's so important here, is that you can't ignore the good. And that's why when I work with my clients, the number one thing that I do with them is an assessment that I've created that I call superpower finding. I need to know, and my clients need to know, and begin to believe again that they are super powerful, incredible, awesome, amazing human beings. And what makes me a good empowerment coach is that an excellent empowerment coach is that I believe in my soul, my gut, and my heart that every person is amazing, incredible, and awesome, like literally awesome, awe-inspiring. And my greatest superpower is that I see and detect and elicit other people's superpowers very quickly and with a lot of ease. And so that's part of the reckoning process, is not just saying, oh my gosh, I lost my husband. I lost half my time with my children. Now I am talking about me. I lost my husband. I lost half my time with my children. I lost, the majority of a household income. I lost some friends. I mean, just the amount of loss in a high conflict divorce is staggering.
Yeah.
Then you move into step 5, which is clearing. Clearing is a super, super important step as well. It's about getting rid of what you don't need in your life, period. It could be relationships. It could be limiting beliefs. It could be fear. It could be, you know, like I said, relationships, other toxic, you know, toxic relationships, or simply decide that you're only going to spend time around people who fit your vision of how you want to feel when you're around your people, right? And people who don't support you in that way, who don't love you unconditionally and care about you for what you want, they might need to fall by the wayside. This is also a time when, and again, I'm talking about hundreds of experiences here, where it's a time of cleaning house in terms of literally Marie Kondoing and getting rid of physical objects in your house that are maybe emotionally charged and may belong to a previous life that is not going to be part of your epic comeback. So there's a lot of purging that I see, especially with my clients who've gone through a divorce or who are in the process of going through a divorce, where they're giving away a lot of possessions, and this is part of the metamorphosis. This is a big part of the transformation, is letting go. Paige, you talked about surrendering, letting go of what does not serve you anymore. And you don't have to have gone through trauma in order to understand the attractiveness and benefits of that process.
Right. I think one of the biggest fears people have, I certainly experience this, is the fear of loneliness, of emptiness, once you start decluttering. But honestly, it is that noise that you fill your life with to avoid the silence often that can be so painful. But it's in that silence, I think, where there's so much discovery that can occur.
In the silence and in the pain.
Yeah.
And that, it is so critical. And this is why, please don't do it alone.
Right.
It is so critical to express the feelings you have. And I'm not just talking about sadness. I'm not just talking about loneliness. Those two, I mean, definitely that, but also anger. And I like to specifically talk to women when it comes to anger, because if you're like me, if you're listening and you're a woman and you're like me, you were kind of raised, as a cultural thing, not to feel angry. And if you did feel angry, well, you better not express that you're angry. So then you internalize it. And if you do actually express that you're angry, you're supposed to express it in a non-angry, polite way. And then if you do express that you're angry in a non-polite way, then you're supposed to apologize. You know, I mean, it's just like, it's ridiculous. Women have this, again, generalization, but I've seen it borne out over and over and over again with myself and with my clients and with people, just women I know, and I know a lot of women.
Oh, you're speaking to the choir, preaching to the choir.
Preaching to the choir, amen. Yeah, and so part of it is learning to express and process anger. And when I was going through my divorce, I was experiencing rage. I was experiencing, like, you could have taken all the anger that I felt, you know, up through the age of whatever it was at the time, 38 or however old I was, or 40, and like packed it all up, and it would have been less than the anger that I felt during the years of my divorce.
And that can manifest in very unhealthy ways if you don't address it.
Exactly. So what I say about, you know, when you are in the emotion and you're feeling the pain and you think that there won't ever be enough tissues for all of the tears that you're shedding, and there won't ever be, you know, a soundproof enough room for all of the anger that you're expressing or the screaming you're doing. I mean, that's why I work out. That was one of the best things for me about working out hard, was that I was expressing anger. And if I would have a difficult conversation with my husband at the time, or with my ex-husband, I would, instead of lying on the couch and just sort of feeling completely flattened, I'd work out.
So I think everyone has to have, I also choose physical fitness as my outlet. Everyone has to have something. It doesn't, I almost we tell the clients, I don't care what it is, but
Yeah.
I learned from one of my very first clients whom it was like, just had overcome a tremendous amount of adversity. It was a recovering alcoholic, and he was in Alcoholics Anonymous, and would often share with me some of their mantras, and excuse me if I'm not using the correct terminology. But, the one that always stuck with me was move a muscle, change a thought. And that will never fail you. If you're ever spinning or like circling the drain, just get up, get out of the room you're in, go for a walk at minimum. But the physical aspect or having some sort of something to take you out of that.
Yep. An outlet.
That cycle
Highly,
is very useful in terms of tools, right? Yeah.
Totally. And highly necessary. And again, especially if you have children, especially if you have children, when you're going through a process like this, it is essential to take care of yourself. It is essential to take care of yourself. And that can be so hard. It can be the last thing you want to do. It is essential to take care of yourself, because when you're on the floor, your kids know that. When you are, en route to feeling joy again, or you're feeling joy again, when you're okay, your kids are okay. When you're not okay, your kids are much less likely to be okay, period. So you got to make yourself okay. And, at the depths of, I am so grateful to my children. I'm so grateful that during this process, I was a mother, and still am, because I had no choice. So what came forth in me was not only warrior energy, because I literally had an adversary, and that's, I hate to even say that, but it's just true. When you're in a legal case, I also developed and very much relied on a mama bear energy. I think those two types of energies, because when people say, how did you get through that time? I don't even really know. I studied, as you know, I'm an expert on this stuff. I'm an expert on how to stage an epic comeback, but there's something that's indescribable that you just don't know. You just don't know how you did it.
Yeah.
And I think that, who knows what it is? That's kind of a spiritual question. But for me, the best way I can describe it is that what brought me through, and what got my left foot stepping in front of my right foot, and then my right foot stepping in front of my left foot, was these energies, these essences of a warrior energy and a mama bear energy that was like, that's instinct. That stuff is instinct that says, I need to move forward. I need to take the next step. I need to turn on to the next thing. Yeah. But if we could just go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say, Nikki, I'm cognizant of time, and I want to make sure we covered everything you wanted to on the diagram. So
the rest of it's really quick. It's simple, but definitely, of course, takes time. Step 6 is creating a vision of what your epic comeback looks like. So I call that the epic vision.
Yeah.
So that, and this is something that coaches just do, because coaches are goal achieving experts. Coaches move you from A to B. That is what a professional coach does. I don't care what kind of coach you are helping your client move from point A to point B. And in my case, point B is an epic comeback. And so step 6 is creating the vision, a super compelling, incredible, beautiful vision of what your epic comeback looks like. What does your life look like? Who are you spending your time with? What is your professional life doing? What are you doing in your professional life? How are you feeling? How are you feeling on a day-to-day basis? Are you filled with joy? Do you feel peaceful? And then steps 7, 8, and 9, very familiar. Once you have a vision, you make a plan to realize that vision. You set some specific goals, objectives, and then you take action.
Yeah.
You act, you take steps, you move toward your plan. And then step 9 is troubleshooting. So I help my clients, inevitably, when you are on a mission, things come up, internal obstacles, external obstacles. So troubleshooting those things as they come up. And then step 10 is the epic launch, which is some kind of some kind of ceremony or photo shoot or achievement or literal launch of a product or a website or a book, or I mean, the launch is some kind of action, culminating action that my
Mm-hmm.
clients take
Mm-hmm.
to say to themselves and potentially to the entire world, I'm back, yo. I'm back.
And then, of course, repeat as necessary, because I want to say, with the troubleshooting stage, I find that it's really important to remind people that having a stumbling block, even though you've overcome so much and you made it to step 9, let's say it's 9 out of 10, if you get a setback, you're still very susceptible to think, oh, none of this worked. It didn't work. Nothing changed. And that and we never anticipate the challenges. When we are creating the vision, the part of the deal is that you're creating the ideal scenario, right?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. And having you by the client's side to say, nope, we're just going to tinker with this a little bit. What didn't you like about it? What did you like? What didn't work for you? How do we go back and reassess how that impacts your vision now? Maybe it's shifting. And that's a beautiful, I mean, I think even in your diagram, you could get, you could sort of, the feedback loop could expand and contract, right?
Yeah. And that's the disclaimer that I always make, is that, first of all, no one's life actually works out in these neat and tidy steps.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
An epic comeback is probably not going to be sequential in this way. So this diagram is not, it's a pathway, and
Mm-hmm.
it's sort of, it's me generalizing themes and steps from, it's an abstraction, right? It's me generalizing themes and steps from many case studies, including my own. So
before we get rid of it, I want to point out, in your toolkit, there's one thing that I think all of these are extremely important. I mean, grit, right? Decisiveness, radical acceptance, and then sense of humor. I will say that I'm so happy you have that there. Just very quickly before we sign off, how does that get you through?
Well, from a chemical point of view, and I'm not, a neurologist or a doctor, but from a chemical point of view, when you laugh, you're releasing endorphins. You're experiencing pleasure. And even just thinking about laughing right now, it makes me feel happy, right? And those, so there are chemicals that get released. Same thing when you work out, there are chemicals that get released. When you have sex, hopefully you're having some good sex during your epic comeback. There are chemicals that get released, right? And taking yourself it's so easy to take yourself seriously when you've been through the apocalypse. So just laughing gets you out of your head. And I'm a fan of anything that gets you out of your head, because I'm an expert on intuition too, and we haven't talked about intuition, and again, so many topics, but basically, like, have a laugh and you get out of your head, and you remember that you're human, and you remember that just, you can't freaking control everything, and it gives you grace. It gives you grace.
Oh, beautifully said. I will add that what has worked for me is to consciously choose content. We live in a content world now, to consciously choose content that is going to please you and make you smile. So whether, you're scrolling through Netflix or your Spotify playlist, opt not for like the tearjerker, opt not for, and opt for something that's just like break your waist funny. And it works every time.
Totally. And if you look at, if you talk to comics, if anyone who studies comics, like stand-up comics, generally speaking, these are people who have gone through back-breaking amounts of trauma, tragedy, and comedy and laughter is an incredible way to cope with pain, loss, trauma, loneliness.
Great. Okay, so does anyone listening, if you have any questions, now is the time. You can also send questions after the recording. If you want to share this recording or come back to it and watch it again, you can do that. But Nikki, I just want to thank you again so much for the conversation. And if you could just share with everybody, how can they reach you if they would like to contact you directly?
Absolutely. And I welcome direct contact. I love talking to folks. And I also offer a complimentary consultation if you're interested in a coaching relationship. And the best way to reach me is through my website, which is theepiccomeback.com.
Great. And we will also be sharing your contact info in our post call wrap up.
Wonderful.
So
thank you.
Yeah, no, Nikki, thank you. It's such a pleasure. I hope that we get to see you in person sometime soon. But I'm wishing you and your family all the very best, and have a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you everyone for joining us, and take care, and we'll talk to you soon.